Okay, can we lower our hands? Can we lower the hands, please?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're fine. I'd like to welcome you again to another session of History East Africa. We are going to continue from where we stopped from. But before I continue, I bring to you the good news. As History Department, we thank God for the performance and we thank God for the good results for the girls 2020. That was a by the way, but we needed to say about it and congratulate ourselves on that performance. As the department, there was a great improvement from 2019. We are going to handle the organization of Buganda Kingdom. But before we continue, just a recap of what you did the other time. You looked at the kingdom, the origin, and we focused on a number of things that explain the origin, where there were theories that you talked about, theories that include the tradition theory, the migration theory, and these are the ones that later led to the existence and establishment of Buganda. Buganda, just remember, is not one theory that can explain her origin, but a number of theories do explain the origin of Buganda. As we still continue, you looked at Buganda starting as a small county, a small kingdom with 3 counties. And the 3 counties, I hope now you have them on your fingertips. Then later she went on expanding, where the last bit you held was about reasons for her expansion and development. When we were introducing ourselves to the Intercastrian region, we split these societies into 2, where we focused on societies that were centralized and societies that were decentralized. We drew characteristics of centralized societies, and today we are having a case study of specifically Buganda, where we are focusing on her organization, politically, socially, and economically. So we are going to see how was Buganda organized. In your S1, you looked at the dimensions through which we look at societies, where we said there were 3, of which I still emphasize political sector or the political dimension who are focused on how they govern themselves. Then economic was the means of survival, and socially is how they kept on moving and interacting within the system, but also with the neighbors. So today's lesson is focused on the organization, what we normally call the way of life of Buganda Kingdom as a case study. We shall begin with the political, but in our introduction, there are key things we need to take. And the introduction, this is what I would want you to have. That Buganda as a small kingdom that had expanded at a later time, ended up organizing herself into political, social, and economic. The characteristics that we drew on centralized societies, now we are going to discuss them in full depth as we talk about Buganda as our case study. So, in the introduction, we would say Buganda was organized politically, socially, and economically as explained below. Political organization, although in our presentation, we must not have headings. Instead, we say politically, this is how Buganda was organized, and then you begin. That the Kabaka was the head of the kingdom, and being the head of the kingdom, He had absolute powers. Here it is about leadership. Although if I'm the one marking, I would split it into two. One being the head of the entire kingdom, which is the first point you have, meaning he was the overall. Then among his responsibilities is where I would say that the Kabaka had absolute powers. Absolute means he was the final. He had the overall powers. And within these powers, we highlight a few of them, like appointing the chiefs, promoting, demoting, and at times dismissing. There you're explaining his responsibility, at the same time, the kind of authority he had. In the next point, his position or leadership within Buganda was hereditary. And that's when we talk about that it was passed on from father to son. The importance of this is that it helped to reduce on succession disputes. Succession means who is coming after the father had passed on. And we know these kings who lived a polygamous life. So it was clear that the kind of succession involved the hereditary one moving from father to son. Priority was always given to the first son, reason being it would command respect. Two, the first son probably had the priority or had the chance to take on the father's shoes. So in our kingdom, as we explained, the Kabaka here was replaced or would be succeeded by the son. In the next slide, that as a kingdom, it was highly centralized. Centralized means that there must have been somebody at the top. If you drew that triangle of yours, you'd have that pointing part or point, and at the apex would say the Kabaka was the head. Then in the sides would have the chiefs that were helping him, and at the bottom would have the peasants or would have the population at large. So as a kingdom, she was highly centralized, a system that ensured effective administration. So the king being at the top would appoint the chiefs, and these chiefs would also take on the responsibility of ensuring the maintenance of law and order, although they had to pay their allegiance to the Kabaka of Buganda. So the key point you're noting there is the centralized system of administration and give its purpose that ensured effective administration. The next slide. We are continuing with the king, that he was the commander in chief or the military head. So he's the one who would command the wage of war, and so the army would be mobilized to go and attack the neighbors. In the next point is about Buganda having a standing army. Like I said the other time, that this army don't necessarily mean people kept on standing as their posture. No, they were only stationed in what in a modern way we call the barracks. And it is these, in case of insurgents, that they would easily deploy them. This army was well trained, equipped, and equipment here at first, they would use the bows, the arrows, and the spears, plus the shields. Later, when guns came in during long distance trade, it also improved on the equipment that the army comprised of. It was a well-disciplined army. Those who have parents, relatives who work in the army, a command is a command. You execute it and then you ask later, but when you have already executed it. So Buganda's army was well disciplined, well trained, well equipped. Its purpose was to maintain law and order, protect the people of Buganda Kingdom and their belonging, just like the UPDF is today. So among the things that the army carried out is raiding weak neighbors, and the example is given there, where Buganda would raid Busoga for cattle and for women. A continuation to the next slide. Please. As we are getting to the next slide, we are also looking at the topic being, or the heading being, political organization. Buganda would loot. Looting is just going to steal, especially in terms of war. They would go and loot and then bring the loot back home, which would be shared among the soldiers. The Kabaka was in the lead of distributing this just to encourage his soldiers or the people that were involved in the war to remain courageous. So they would wage war knowing, or raids knowing they were going to benefit at the end of the day. The next point is that Buganda had a naval force. Naval, those that fight on water, and it was a canoe, or these were canoes on Lake Victoria. Some of you who have participated in Buganda or who have watched Buganda's events, they are normally competitions to do with boat riding. And in the boat riding, that is where even the skill would be developed among the soldiers, how to be fast, how to be efficient on water, and how to fight on water, which was an added advantage on the Kingdom of Buganda that benefited her in the political sector. So on Lake Victoria, which was used to transport and patrol the islands, as well as bringing in wealth raids from those other communities that were taken advantage of. In the next slide, we are focused still on political organization, where I said division is the key word. So Buganda was subdivided into counties, and we must take note of these names in Uganda. I'm getting a feedback. Please just mute your phones.
Your Honor.
Yeah, and when I get the feedback, me, I'll just get off. It's disturbing my ears if I'm using headphones. So we have divisions based on 1, Gaza, sub-counties, parishes, sub-parishes, and then finally villages. Which villages? We are just discussing it at the grass.
Mr. Chiwewa, kindly unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Mr. Chiwewa. Mr. Chiwewa. Mr. Chiwewa, can you unmute yourself? I have muted everyone. Mr. Chiwewa.
Hello?
Yes, I can now hear you.
Are you getting me?
Yes.
Okay. So back to the point of a division is the next slide I was discussing. Can we get to the next slide, please? Division of the kingdom. So we go ahead to break down how she was divided and the purpose. Divided into counties, which are called Masaza, and that's when you talk about Budu, Chadondo. They are the ones we are bringing forward. Then sub-counties, these are usually gombololas in our localities, wherever we come from, parishes are miluka, then sub-parishes, and lastly, the villages that made up a chalo. Why these divisions? It was to ensure effective administration, maintenance of law and order from the grassroots to the top. So the village was headed or was the smallest political unit. In our villages where we come from, that's when we refer to LC1 chairman. And these gave out land for cultivation under the authority of the clan head. In the next point, Kabaka appointed chiefs, and the appointment of these chiefs was to ensure still effective administration, but these chiefs would only retain their positions if only they were loyal to the appointing authority. Loyalty to appointing authority involved implementing what had been decided upon, and at the same time, maintenance of law and order. So these chiefs helped to administer the counties. The Twitter, usually we call them Abasajja ba Kabaka. I'm forgetting the name that I wanted to bring out because they are still in existence, who are in charge. I know for the case of Budu, it is Pokino. Chadondo here, it is Kago. If you've heard of those names, Sechiwowo, I think is of Chagwe. I can just stop there to tell you about who these leaders were and are still in existence. So the chiefs were representatives of the people and were responsible for maintenance of law and order. I've emphasized that. They made sure there were construction and maintenance of those roads. Sometime back when we were still young, would hear those people who would sound drums and would see people at the village moving with their horse to go and clear the roads and the wells at the same time. So the chiefs also played a role of collecting tributes in their areas. And the tributes, these were signs of payment of allegiance to the Kabaka for appreciation. They were also responsible for the supply of men who would participate or would give military service and labor to the king's court. So the chiefs were just important in the structure of administration. The last point on that slide is the Kabaka was the final court of appeal who had powers over life and over death. He's the one who would declare war, and he's the one who would set captives free, at the same time, the prisoners free. Just like it is in our country or in the Republic, that the final person to endorse any law that is to be put in place is the president. I'll just explain it in that context. And he has certain powers that are given to him in the Constitution, where he sets prisoners free after a given time. He pardons on them. So even the Kabaka had that. He was the final court of appeal. Marriage was another political tool, and to emphasize it here, the Kabaka lived a polygamous life where he married women from all the 52 clans. In so doing, marriage as a political tool, how was it beneficial? It would help to cement, unite people of various clans. So they would look at each other as people of the same, I would say the same family. And so this would minimize the disputes. So he married women from the 52 clans. So each clan, none of the clans seemed to be greater than the other, and the essence was cementing unity. Peasants within the kingdom were allowed to move in the kingdom only when they sought permission from the headman or the headman. who was the headman here? We are talking about the village level. Movement from one place to another ensured that there's sanity, whereby they got to know where you're coming from and where you're going. Peasants could not just move anyhow. They needed to seek for permission from the headman. In the next slide, Chakabaka had that legislative body, which we call in Uganda the Rukiko. Those who have been to Bulange, it is still even in existence, which was the parliament entrusted with the powers of enacting laws. So it was the Supreme Council that played that role. They usually assembled and would advise the Kabaka on the governance of the kingdom effectively. The composition of this Rukiko would be another point, although we have brought it in here. It comprised of the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice, the Treasurer, and then the clan heads. In the current state, our Rukiko is made up of the Prime Minister, who I hope you know. If you have forgotten about him, you'd inquire from your parents, but I know you know who he is. The Chief Justice was Omulamuzi. The Treasurer was Omuwanika, or is Omuwanika. And then the clan head is the one that we call Kasa Sabataka, if I'm not mistaken, who heads all the clan. So that is the composition of the parliament or the Rukiko as a legislative body for the kingdom. The Kabaka was assisted by 3 prominent chiefs. These are the ones I've been mentioning. Chief Justice, the Treasurer, Omuwanika, and then the Prime Minister. These helped in effective governance of Uganda at large as a kingdom. On the next slide, we are still looking at the royal regalias as symbols of unity. These existed in Buganda and they were key. They represented things to do with power. They were the symbols that were highly respectable. These included the royal drum, the spear, the throne. Here we have chairs, but we call it the throne, Namulondo. Then the backcloth, the leopard skin, and then the shield. Those who watched the celebration for the coronation of our king, Kabaka of Uganda, people were celebrating the 28 years he has spent in leadership of the kingdom of Uganda amid some challenges. There were people who are clothed in the back cloth. Usually you see them seated to the Kabaka. If you saw him speak, they were there. But where he was seated, first of all, he wore a leopard skin. Leopard skin signifies his strength. And then there's a back cloth. The back cloth is a symbol of the cloth that we would use to cover our nakedness. The throne, the chair he normally sits on that you call the chair, it is a symbol of power because when he sits on that, he's in charge. There's usually a stick that is also shown that we call damula. Damula is usually given to the Prime Minister Katikiro in his appointment, where he's given part of the powers to lead Buganda on behalf of the Kabaka, and he plays that role. So these were symbols of power that were highly respected, the royal regalias. The Kabaka himself had the royal bodyguard called Abamboa. And Abamboa, I'm just mentioning it, or I mentioned it. If you've seen the Kabaka move around, those are the main, you still have shields, and they have the backcloth, and they have the spear. They were the one in charge of the security of the Kabaka. And at the palace, they were also significant in ensuring that the palace is at peace. So these are the ones that played that role, that the Kabaka was safe. Kabaka received gifts from his subjects and the chiefs, and the receiving of these gifts is seen as a sign of loyalty, appreciation to the Kabaka. Probably if one had been appointed a chief, this is how you'd show your appreciation. So you take a gift to the Kabaka, which we normally see. There are some gifts that is sent to the Kabaka. Those who have been to Bulange, different clan heads, when appointed, bring in items to do with food, items to do with money, name it, but it's a token of appreciation. And loyalty was a sign that showed they were paying their allegiance to the Kabaka for the position given to them. In our next slide, don't forget, we are still focused on political organization. Before I go to me, there are questions you'd want me to handle as concerning the political organization. I say hand up. Can I get the questions? A question, please. Okay.
Let me
So what
unmute them. I had muted them. Let me unmute so that
Okay.
I can ask. You can have Lugolovi.
Yes,
Yes, she
can
was
you ask a
asking.
question?
Yes, I was asking that you say that the king can marry from any of the 52 clans. So does that mean that he can marry as many wives as possible, or just one from any of the 52?
Marrying one from any of the 52, meaning that all the 52 would be happy when the queen is got from their clan. So this helped to keep them stay at peace, knowing that they are all equal before the Kabaka. So he was free to choose from the 52 clans who to marry. Not that he would marry all the women in those 52 clans, but he would choose one from any of the 52 clans.
And then also the Amambo, do they have to, like, what age group are they supposed to be? Like, from what age to which age?
As time went on, that went on changing, but the age then, one would start being at the palace of the king at the age of 8. Then they would be trained. It would matter how long it would take. At times they would stretch up to, one would decide to be a guard to the king forever. So from 8 onwards, it would stretch up to around 32 to 40. Because as human beings, you also grow up and get tired, you become inefficient. So somebody else comes on the scene to replace you. So as age would catch up with you, there will be a replacement.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Welcome. Any other question?
Let's have Paula.
Paula, please ask.
Yes, I was asking, what was the Chico?
What was the Rukiko? The Rukiko was a legislative body in the present republic. We regard it as a parliament. So it is where laws
thank you, sir.
would be enacted. And it's still in our Buganda setting. This Rukiko still exists. It is in Bulange where they normally meet and sit and discuss the kingdom issues. Any other question?
We also have we have Daniela.
Daniela asked.
Teacher, since the Kabaka was allowed to marry from all the 52 clans, would it be regarded as an abomination if he decided to marry from another tribe?
From another tribe? Yeah,
Yeah.
because there's what we call identity and the heritage. Buganda expected to have a king, even up today, who we believe in must be from Buganda as a tribe. So other tribes were never accepted. We will not get a leader. Can imagine having a Choli as the Kabaka of Buganda. So it was never acceptable. Must have been from Buganda and Buganda alone.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
You're welcome. Other questions, Dan?
There is Betty. We have Betty Ntege.
Yes, Ntege, please ask.
Teacher, I was wondering on this point of marrying women. What if Kabaka wants a woman and the woman doesn't want? Was there anything like rejecting the Kabaka, or you just go?
It was very, very impossible for one to reject the king's offer. And in any case, the king marrying you, no one wouldn't want to associate with the king. So there is how it would raise one's status. Just like you've heard about people wanting to associate with the first family in Uganda. Just talking about that you're from State House. Even some have brought it closer that you're from the president's lineage or from the president's family. There's a way it makes somebody look special. So it was very hard for one to turn down the offer of the king. And besides, the king would just send messengers who are the middlemen. So no one would reject that.
Married, I would just go.
Even if you were
married to another man.
No. Yeah, at times people would go and, by the way, let me first say what used to happen. Once a king say would come, let's say coming to Gayaza, and we are looking at Gayaza as a chiefdom or Gayaza as a parish. And in that area, he takes notice of anyone he would want to pick interest in. He would just send the messengers who would come, talk to you. Even when you are married, by the way, the husband would just go and thank the Kabaka for just choosing, having the same taste. I would say having the same taste, because why of all people is the Kabaka taking your wife? So the man would go and say, oh, please, thank you of all people, of all families, all marriages, you've just taken on mine. And it would boost somebody's status. At the end of the day, such people would be given gifts in form of land, chunks and chunks of land as appreciation. So it was very rare for one to reject. Although still the king would be considerate. He would not just come and take people's wives. But in case it happened, that was a trend.
Okay, thank you.
Any other?
Let's have two more.
Two more, and then I move on quickly on economic. Please.
We have Letitia.
Letitia, ask.
Just hold on. The screen has. Okay. Letitia, you can go ahead.
Excuse me, teacher. Can you repeat for me the heading of this work we are discussing?
we are discussing the organization of Buganda Kingdom as a case study. And so we are looking at how Buganda lived. We normally said the way of life of Buganda Kingdom, or how was Buganda organized politically, socially, and economically. So we are beginning on the first part of political organization.
So, teacher, is it different from the factors that contributed to the growth and expansion of Buganda Kingdom?
Yes, it is different when it comes to explanation. The growth and expansion, those were general factors. But now we are focused on how Buganda governed herself politically, how Buganda survived, that is the economic, and how Buganda would relate with her members at the same time with the neighbors, which you know might call the social organization. So it is different from the factors of her growth and expansion in explanation.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Next, the last one.
Yes, the other one, we have Cynthia.
Cynthia asked.
Teacher,
Yes,
in exams, can they ask you to, like, when they say describe the political organization, the way of life of the Buganda Kingdom, can they tell you to just write the political organization?
Now, when the question is set, usually read questions and get them right. Once it says describe the political, economic, and social, please answer the question the way it has been said. So you begin with political, then go to economic, and then go to social. However, all those can be included in your introduction, that Buganda was organized politically, socially, and economically as explained below. However, when the question says describe the way of life of Buganda, the examiner requires you to look at the three sections: political, economic, and social. If it is specific, answer it as specific. If it is way of life, then you're free to begin with either economic or social or political.
Okay, thank you, teacher.
Okay. So can we get back to the economic organization, to the slides, Mr. Joel?
Are we carrying on, or we're starting from here?
Is it time?
No. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, I want the slide, economic organization.
Economic organization. This is where
are we there?
Yes, I'm there. That's where I have been. That's where we are on the slide. Okay, economic organization. Are you seeing it, Mr. Chiwewa? Mr. Chiwewa, are you there? Mr. Chiwewa, are you there? Mr. Chiwewa, can you, okay, kindly, okay, I can hear you. You had muted yourself.
Okay, I've got it. Economic organization is what we are looking on now, and we want to see how Buganda survived. The first one, we take note that basically they lived a life of being agriculturists, and this depended on the climatic conditions in their area of locality. So, as we explained, their survival, it depended mainly on agriculture. In this point, please break it down, because now we are looking at the crops that they grew most. And so their staple food was none other than bananas. We usually write matoke, the fact that we are talking about Buganda. So we say matoke was their staple food. And then we bring in other foods like maize, sweet potatoes, cassava, beans, just to mention a few. In the economic organization, the next practice was specialization, which specialization was held in agricultural activities. So you tell us what main did and what women and children did as far as farming was concerned. So men would clear the farms, the bushes, women and children would do the cultivation, planting, weeding, and lastly would be harvesting. So in times of war still under specialization, the men had a role. Theirs was to give service in the forces, and so would also help in carrying the roads, in the construction, making of boats, hunting, and backcloth, among others. Can I have the next slide, please? In our next slide, we have the Kabaka himself and other world people kept animals. And the animals they kept here were none other than the cattle, the sheep, the goat, the pigs, and then the chicken. So these were just to provide them with food in form of milk and meat. Hunting was another economic activity where it was done in a group because it's a risk venture. And so they would hunt the buffaloes, the elephants, the wild pigs, just to get meat and supplement on their diet. Sometimes these would be hunted down, especially when they would destroy their crops. The elephants enjoy a lot of maize, a lot of sweet potato leaves. And so once they would come, just like the buffaloes look more like cows. And anything to do with their vegetation here, which is the crops that were grown in Buganda, to the animals, this was food. So in case they would come and destroy the foods, then they would be hunted down. But the thing I want you to note is that hunting was done for leisure. Hunting was done to get food that would supplement on their diet. In our next slide, we are focused on backcloth making, which was another economic activity, highly admirable. Why? It was done in a group, and it is through this that they were able to make what would cover their nakedness or what would give them comfort when the climate would change. The backcloth in the present society has been looked at as a cloth that we use to bury our beloved ones. But initially, it was a cloth that would be worn, and one who would put it on would be elegant. So this was done, and it was a skill. Backcloth, there's usually a tree where that bark would be peeled off, dried, and then they would make a cloth, which came to be known as a backcloth, or a cloth that would be used for covering. In our next activity, which was economic, with fishing, because of Buganda's locality within the Intercastrian region, made up of big water bodies, they would do the fishing just to supplement on their diet. So they would fish, especially those that live near water bodies. On Lake Victoria, they would do the fishing, and that would help them to catch and supplement. I know fish is a delicacy to many of you, so they enjoyed it. In the next slide, Uganda practiced interstate trade. So interstate trade meaning she would trade among the different states. For example, trading with Busoga, Teso, Bunyoro. Here, go ahead and highlight what she would trade for. If it was Bunyoro, Buganda needed salt from Lake Catherine. Buganda needed the iron implements or the iron balls, and in exchange, Buganda would sell to them the backcloth. For the case of Teso, you look at the animals, the cows that were highly needed, and even the food. So it is an activity that was done as trade. You could still go ahead and explain. At a later stage, she participated in what came to be known as long distance trade. Raids were important as other activities that would boost the economy of Buganda. So she raided her weak neighbors and even those that seemed to be strong. As Buganda went on advancing and growing stronger, she would even raid the strong neighbors, but raiding them for what? For animals, this is cattle, for slaves, for ivory. And that also helped to see that Buganda benefits. In the economic sense, cattle would be used for prestige, would also be used as a medium of exchange. Only that today we have currencies, but in those days they would use barter trade. The slaves were the ones that were being sold. So slaves were the items that would be sold off together with ivory, especially at the time of long distance trade. In our next slide, Buganda Kingdom, we focus on social organization. Is there anything you want me to throw light on economic organization before I go through the social organization?
So
Any question?
Yeah, there are a number of questions. Let's have Tyra.
I request to have 3 of them or 4 of them, and then I
Okay,
move on.
there were some 3 that I hadn't chosen. There was Tyra and someone else, but let's first have Tyra Allison.
Okay.
Tyra,
please ask.
Do you still have a question?
Yes, I do. Teacher, may we first go back to political organization about the
you say the point about
the Kawaka receiving gifts. Yeah.
What is the question?
I didn't get it well. I didn't get
The
that
Kawaka, Kawaka receiving gifts was a tradition among chiefs, and sending gifts or taking gifts to the palace of the king showed that you are a loyal person who respects your king. And as these gifts were brought, what was the gesture? The gesture was people were appreciating the Kawaka, say, if they had been appointed as chiefs, or others who were just doing it as their duty, that they would take supply food to the palace. We know that in the palace, most of the times, it is the people at the grassroots under the organization of the chiefs who would feed the people who worked at the palace. So once the cattle, say the matoke, say any food was brought to the palace, whoever would bring it, it was a gesture of appreciation. It was a gesture of commitment. It was a gesture of thanking the Kawaka for having chosen them. Of all the population of Buganda, that the Kawaka had picked one to become a chief. So these are the gifts that were taken to the palace of the king.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's have Rugolobi.
Yes, Rugolobi asked.
Is Rugolobi there? Yes, Rugolobi. Okay.
Yes, excuse me, teacher.
Okay.
Yes, please. Lisa?
Okay, sure. I'm not seeing her. Let's have Ntongo.
Ashao, I was requesting you you re-explain the trade items that want to trade with the specific tribes.
The trade items?
Yes,
I have
teacher.
talked about Busoga, brother Bunyoro, that Buganda would trade with Bunyoro for what? For salt, for the iron implements like the hoes, the pangas, the spears. When it came to long distance trade, that's when we bring in slaves, ivory. I hope you remember that items of long distance trade.
Yes, teacher.
When we talk about teso, we look at the animals. Ankole, animals. Those are the ones we are picking as trade items. Just to mention a few, you don't have to list a lot. You just pick one society and emphasize the point of the interstate trade. Next person.
Let's have Noella.
For some of the, I wanted to ask on the economic, like the stuff we're talking about under the economic organization.
Economic organization.
Yeah, some of them don't seem economic because, for example, when we say they carried out fishing to improve on their diet, and then what next? Like after improving on your diet, how is it economically benefiting them?
Because I said under economic organization, we want to see how Buganda survived. So she survived by fishing. Fishing being an activity that would help them to supplement on their diet. How is it economic? It's economic in the sense that it is a means of survival. People getting something to live on, being fishing, done on the water bodies. Have you got it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you see, if you remember in S1 we said we are teaching history in 3 dimensions: political, economic, and social, which I started with, and I expected that question. So under economic, the economic section, we are emphasizing the survival point. Under political, we are looking at governance. And under social, we are focused on how she would relate within and outside, that is with the neighbors. Next person.
Daphne.
I think she would be the last one.
Okay, yes, that should be the last, so that you wrap up. Namugabo.
As you said that you should give points of social, economic, and political. I wanted to ask if there come a question and they only want you to give political. Like, is it possible?
Yeah, it is possible. That's why I said read questions and get them right. On many questions, on many times, they would ask political and economic. One only gives political. You miss marks for economic. Once the question says political, please give only for political. Don't bring in economic and social. I hope I'm clear. So read questions and answer them specifically as they have been said.
Thank you, teacher.
Okay. Social organization is what I want us to look at quickly. The heading is social organization. In social organization, we want to see how Buganda was relating within herself and her neighbors. One, the social in Buganda, her organization was based on clan basis. And the clan basis here, those that Baganda know where they come from, their heritage. Every Muganda belonged to a particular clan, like I belong to a lion clan. Out of the 52 clans, one needed to belong somewhere, and at the apex would have the clan leader or the clan head. Why was this a social activity? It was social in the way that it provided one's identity. It helped in maintenance of law and order. And besides, it would make people proud. They would be prestigious of where they belong. So socially, Buganda was organized on a clan basis. It's the 52 clans that make up the kingdom of Buganda. So the identity concept would be you're part of the 52, and so you are a Muganda or you belong to Buganda kingdom. Socially, each family belonged to a specific clan, and each had its own shrine where sacrifices were offered to ancestors, just in appreciation of loyalty. The sacrifices involved food, beer, animals, and birds sacrifice. So in that point, we are looking at a family where everybody had their specific clan and their specific shrine as a sacred place of worship among the Baganda. Usually this would be at the back of the main house. In the next slide.
Are we going to just finish up with the social part?
Yes, I'm going to finish up with it and then I'll conclude.
Okay.
Just 5 minutes since we...
Okay, let's say we can have 5 minutes. Yes, let's have a 5.
Just 5 minutes, I'll be done.
Okay.
Then the kingdom was built on a class basis. Here we are looking at how people were divided. We had the royals who are referred to as Abalangila, Abambeja. The chiefs were appointees of the Kabaka as the Bakungu. Then peasants, who are the commoners, Abakopi, and lastly the slaves, Abadu. So people knew where they belonged. Once you belong to any of that, you would know where your level lies. Religiously, Buganda had a belief in ancestral spirits, and these were regarded as Duvales, who were thought or who were always sought at the time of need. So they were believed to have supernatural powers. And we talked about the shrines. If you remember the shrines, this is where the religious activities would be held from, where they offered the food, where they offered the sacrifices, name it. The other practice in the social setting was living a sacrificial life. So they end up sacrificing to these small gods just in consultation or in appreciation. So sacrifice was done to appease, at the time help do away with the challenges as they would befall Buganda kingdom. In our next slide, Mr. Joel, in our next slide, we are focused on native witch doctors that were also consulted. I think we've moved faster. Okay, let me begin with this, that Buganda, there were native doctors who were consulted in case of misfortune. I think I was pointing to that, say prolonged drought, famine, sickness like smallpox. Those are the ones that these doctors would be sought to help sacrifice and talk to the ancestors to intervene. Then they observed totems, a mizilo. Each of them belonged to the respective clan with its varying state. Totems, these are what we call a mizilo. Those who usually take on, say, if you are from the Mamba clan, you don't eat the Mamba fish. There is that fish that people enjoy. You're not meant to eat it. Those who belong to the cow clan, they are supposed to pay respect to this, and so they must not eat it or they would not eat it. Those are the Mizilo totems that would show respect to. Eating such implied, if you're eating, let's say, your mom's totem, then you're disrespectful to your mom. If it is you, then you're disrespectful to your own clan. Marriage is a point that they lived a polygamous life right away from the king to the chiefs. And why this marriage was basically to ensure that there is increase in population or there is increase in the labor force at the same time with its associated advantages. Virginity was highly respected among the Baganda, and to show that they were highly appreciative of your personality as a virgin, they would give a gift at marriage, and the gift was none other than a goat. So once a goat would be offered, it was a symbol even to those around that she remained pure until marriage. The question you have is describe the way of life of Buganda, which I hope I handled. This requires you to talk about political, social, and economic. Say the question is describe the political organization of Buganda. Please just describe political, don't bring in other things. Yes, Joel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiwewa.
You're welcome.
Yes, that's it.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You're welcome.
And Joel?
All right.
Yes. Mr. Joel, let me ask my colleagues to say something quickly.
Okay.
In 1 minute, and then we are off.
Okay. Me, I'm just appreciative for the thorough discussion you have made for the girls. Indeed, you have discussed the organization very, very well. And I know the girls it. Only that what they have to know, maybe let them know what features are embedded into political, that is basically governance. Economic, they get to know the economic activities and all the work that people did, that is economic. Social is what we believed in, what people used to do during their leisure time, to help just them get to know how do we differentiate a political from a social from economic. But I have nothing to add on much. I'm contented that everything has been discussed today.
Thank you.